Yo, what's up, everybody? It's BDF44, and today I'd like to talk about, well, as much as I can, because I don't know as much about the team as I'd like to, but the Detroit Pistons. I want to give them some acknowledgement. So basically, I was playing 2K, as I always do, and throughout the season, I started looking into, throughout my season, I was looking into the standings and looking at who's doing well in the simulated world. And the Pistons were the number 2 team in the Eastern Conference. And the season has gone all the way into January at this point, and they're still the second best team in the East. That doesn't tell me anything at all, because in video games, it's just that it's video games, and a lot of things can happen in terms of trades and injuries and stuff that will affect seeding just like it will in real life. But the one thing that's consistent is the fact that they have been the second best team throughout the entire season that I've played in. So what that tells me is there are some things on the basketball court that are to be considered, and there are some things that they can bring to the table that are positive. That's one thing that I can say. Maybe they are an underrated team in the Eastern Conference. Now, I looked at what they did in the draft. They got Sekou Dimboya. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but I know he's a strong power forward, small forward player. I'm not really sure what his strengths and weaknesses are, but he's definitely a player that they got midway through the draft that they're excited about. Obviously, Blake Griffin. To me, Blake Griffin is a guy who's overachieved a lot of the time in the league. Obviously, when he came out of college, he was expected to be a superstar. But once he got settled into his role as a player, we started to see what he could really do. And he was really, really nice on the offensive end. Obviously, he can jump out the gym and all those good things, but he was also a fantastic passer. And he's a ever-improving shooter from just about every range. And in my mind, I can't think of a guy, maybe Jason Kidd, but not too many guys who've come into the league without a jump shot and then progress into having a very good jump shot. He's one of the best names in terms of an example of that. He's just really, really worked so hard on his shot, and now he's one of the more consistent guys who can have a little nice spot-up shot, and he's clutch too. I've seen him hit many a shot down the stretch, even buzzer shots from Trey. So we know Blake Griffin is a bona fide star with the potential to help you win basketball games any night. And he's very consistent. I'm big on Blake Griffin, always have been. I think the only issues I have with Blake Griffin is injuries, honestly, and defensive strength. He's never really been the type of guy who's going to body you in the paint. He'll jump over you in his heyday, but when you go up against him, you can kind of push him around a little bit. You can body him a little more. He's not as tough of a guy as you want him to be with the type of athleticism that he's displayed. But other aspects of his game in terms of his passing, which is what's most impressed me from the power forward position. Anytime you have a power forward, Chris Webber, type of guys like that, obviously LeBron James, anytime you have a power forward that can pass the rock, a big that can pass the rock, you're going to have a lot of success if you have guards that move around. And now that they've picked up Derrick Rose, they have a guy by the name of Langston Galloway who's really good at spot-up shooting, nice role player. They have some guys, man. They have Luke Kennard, who I still think is a developing player. Lord knows they should have drafted Donovan Mitchell. We all know that. But the fact that they still have this young player who was drafted in the lottery, who is known for his shooting, who has very good footwork from what I've seen, there's a lot of upside to like about this kid. And there's no pressure on him. He's being brought along slowly, and I think one day we'll look up and he'll be a very, very serious offensive threat, and maybe even more. So I'm looking forward to seeing more from Luke Kennard. They also have a guy that the Lakers used to have on their bench that the Lakers didn't value very much by the name of Svi Mykhailiuk. Can't believe I'm saying his name, pronouncing his name correctly, but that is exactly how I pronounce it, Mykhailiuk. And the guy, it has a lot of pop. I called him JJ Redick with pop. He was one of those guys that I would have secretly kept on my bench and out of trade talks. I would have never let go of that dude. And he was a rookie that we drafted in the second round last year, but he has really, really good handles for his size and for his style of play. He can bounce all around, all over the place. He has an excellent streaky type of offensive mindset. He can shoot, he can drive, he can jump a little bit for a guy his size. He just has all the intangibles of a really, really nice shooter going forward. And they have him on their bench. I know he can affect the basketball floor in positive ways from the bench right now. I know he can tear up second and third units right now. If you give him an opportunity, put him in summer league, he can be a standout in the summer league. That's the type of talent that he has. So Svi Mykhailiuk, keep an eye on him, Detroit. he's somebody you should definitely pay attention to. Another guy that I like on that bench by the name of Thon Maker. I know Thon Maker, and I've been on record saying this, and I still feel this way to this very second. That was one of the worst draft picks the Bucks ever made. One of the worst draft picks I've ever seen. He was taken 10th in the draft when he was projected to go in the second round, but they took him because of his length, and I think they did have the right idea in terms of putting him on their roster, but obviously they didn't wait to see if he would develop. I don't know if there were other things going on, but they parted ways with him, and he ended up in Detroit. I think Detroit's a pretty solid space for him, even though he's playing behind some very serious high usage big men. He's still going to have opportunities to develop and grow, and I think playing with a guy like Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond should help. Speaking of Andre Drummond's one of the most underrated players in the league. Simply one of the most underrated players in all of basketball. He's been stuck in Detroit on a bad team for a long time, and the game itself has kind of moved away from what his strengths are. So now he's kind of a guy like Hassan Whiteside, sort of like some of those guys who are trying to find their way, who would have otherwise dominated in the past. I think this would have been Drummond's league if he would have came in directly after Shaq went out, and the game would have stayed the way it was. He was the next Shaq, if you ask me. But he's very bad from the free throw line, like Shaquille, and it's one of those situations where, like I said, he's not going to stretch the floor, so the game has kind of passed him up because it's a shooting perimeter type of game. Or if you're a big man, you better be able to stretch the floor. He never had those type of skills, but what he did bring to the table was massive rebounding talent and supreme athleticism. The dude can jump out the freaking gym. He grabs everything. He's a really solid shot blocker. And like I said, rebounding, dunking, all that stuff, he does that in his sleep. He's one of the best rebounders in all the league, and a very consistent basketball player for them. And I think he's fairly durable. I don't think he really gets hurt too much. I'd have to be educated on that, but I don't recall seeing him miss too much basketball. So he's definitely somebody who anchors their center position and anchors their team. So when you have two really talented big men, one of them can stretch the floor in Blake Griffin, the other one can clean up the glass like crazy. You're going to have opportunities to run up some wins in the Eastern Conference, and I think that's why the simulator has it so that they're the second best team in the Eastern Conference. Now, do I think they're the second best team in the Eastern Conference in real life? I don't see that at all. Not at all. I don't see enough on their bench to make that happen. But I do like the additions that they have on their team, and Derrick Rose. We know Derrick Rose at this point in time in his career is a role player, but he's like Boogie, could overachieve and outplay his role. If Boogie would have stayed healthy, you expect him to come in, give you a little bit of something. You're hopeful that he can turn back into his old self. I had that same type of upside for Derrick Rose going forward. He's been in good conditioning for the last several years. He's had good years everywhere he's gone for the last several years. I could have argued he was an all-star candidate last year with Minnesota, and I could have argued he was an all-star candidate when he was in New York. Both of those tenures were really good for him, and now he's in a space where there's not a whole lot of pressure. He's going to be playing with a guy like Reggie Jackson, who I think, if I'm reading the tea leaves, Reggie Jackson's value's not very high. They've been probably looking to replace him for a long time. His contract was way out of whack, and there was really no way to get rid of him, but you don't really like him. It's the kind of player he is or has been since he left OKC. So it's like you bring in a guy like Derrick Rose, you get some insurance on him. If for some reason Reggie Jackson's not giving you something, or if he's hurt, you're bringing in Derrick Rose and you're stabilized. So I think their bench overall and their supporting cast overall is much more catered to the timeline that they have now that they've brought in a guy like Derrick Rose to go along with the vets, Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. So that's a nice little tandem that they can have of reliable offensive players and players who can really go out there and help you. So, for me, if I'm looking at the Pistons, I'm saying, well, Blake Griffin may stabilize them to get them into the 8th or 7th spot. So I'm not certain I'm pushing them all the way out the playoffs. I have to look at the rest of the landscape of the Eastern Conference to really know how I feel about the Pistons. But I did want to hop on here and just acknowledge the fact that, the video game, as far as I'm seeing, is showing that they're a productive basketball team, and their roster isn't bad. They've got some pieces on their roster that you could be fairly optimistic about. They have another guy by the name of Tony Snell on the team. I know that the meme, I think I mentioned this before, but there was a meme going around of Tony Snell who had like 0 in every category for like 30-something minutes. So, that's not a good thing. But I remember Tony Snell. He's a nice role player. I paid attention to him when he was in Chicago, and I know he's going to Milwaukee. He had some success there. So, for a role player, swing man, somebody who can float between the 2 and the 3 spot, you could do a lot worse. So they got some pieces. At the end of the day, the Pistons are decent of a team as any in the Eastern Conference, as far as I can see in that middle of the pack area of the Eastern Conference. They're as decent as a New York or Orlando, maybe. So why wouldn't they be in that conversation? So that's pretty much what I wanted to say, man. Hope everybody's enjoying themselves. Shout out to everybody in Detroit. I wanna acknowledge Flint and the water crisis going on there. That's something that I've had close to my heart for a long time, just understanding how ridiculous that is. So shout out to everybody in their efforts of trying to fix that, and I hope that we can finally not have to equate Flint with that crisis anymore. Let's just get back to being who they are, known for great athletes, known for great basketball players. So shout out to Flint, man. Long live everybody out there. And yeah, peace, man. It's BDF 44 speaking to you. Thanks for watching.